Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fourth and final episode of Bicycle Commuting 101. My name is Jordan Evans. I'm a transportation planner at the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments. The series is brought to you by ACOG and Watch For Me, OK. ACOG is the leading voice for regional collaboration in Central Oklahoma. Our organization is a voluntary, nonpartisan association of local governments. Our mission is to advocate for regional cooperation, address common issues, solve mutual problems, and promote efficient government services in Central Oklahoma. Watch For Me OK is a public awareness campaign from ACOG and the city of Oklahoma City. Watch For Me OK seeks to educate the public on the rules of the road and aims to keep our residents safe while traveling. Like I said, this is our final session of our Bicycle Commuting 101 series. We've had 3 others so far. These have included webinars about getting started bike commuting, picking a route and pairing with transit, talking about the basics of bicycle maintenance. And our 4th one today is bicycle commuting as a parent. We currently have the first 3 on our ACOG YouTube page, and we'll be posting all 4 of these to our website next week. Our speaker today is Tony Carfang. Tony is a software engineer on the B-52, having joined Boeing OKC in 2015 after completing his PhD in aerospace engineering from the University of Colorado. With his wife, Jenny, he started the Pillows to Pedals program at Boeing to develop interested but concerned riders into savvy cyclists. Together, they actively promote employee health, safety, and active commuting within Boeing. They do this mostly through educational lunch and learns and bike to work day events. They also lead neighborhood bike rides to ice cream shops and playgrounds. You can find Tony on his iconic cargo bike next to his wife, Jenny, pulling along his daughter, Isabella, and his dog, Sagan. So Tony, I'm really looking forward to this, talking about bicycle commuting as a parent. You're definitely the example a lot of people strive to be, so looking forward to your talk, and I will turn it over to you. I will change presenters.
All right, thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here and always really happy to partner with all the great stuff that ACOG is doing, as well as just interacting with everybody in the community and sharing my story and hopefully converting a few people. So with that, Jordan gave a great introduction. So first things first, I am a league certified instructor, and I do need to include the natural disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer. I do a lot of work with Bike Oklahoma with regard to legislation, and the information that I give is tips and knowledge that I've acquired, my own personal interpretation of the law, and anything you take out of this is of your own free will. But I do believe it's pretty good advice. So the big aspect when asking around why would people be interested in bicycling as a family or bicycling from the age of 6 or up to the age of 80, what sort of major factors would motivate somebody to want to ride a bike their entire life? A couple of big things that come to mind: being able to be independent in your mobility. So most kids and teens really look forward to the day of getting a driver's license and being able to drive themselves around town. Of course, the bike as a kid is their first taste of real mobile freedom. So being able to start your kids off from infant level and grow up with it as a transportation mode, all the way to beyond your own health where your eyesight or other capabilities might not be spectacular for driving, still being able to be independent. So it's a pretty powerful mode of transportation in my mind, and one of the major reasons why I'm so heavily an advocate for it. One of the other big elements that comes to mind is to giving kids their own independence or biking with them. How many of you have been in the drop-off line during the morning rush hour taking your kids to school? I don't remember the exact statistic, but I will research this some more later and get back to you all. Something around the 30%, maybe as much as 40%, depending on the locale, of morning rush hour traffic is the school run. And idling cars outside of schools aren't particularly great either. It's no fun for anybody. So biking to school is a pretty cool look that you get from teachers and other drivers who are just jealous of you. So it's really fun to be able to skip that drop-off line. Being able to use bikes as transportation, gives kids more outdoor time. It helps develop their habits of physical activity. It's great for their heart. It's great for their lungs. Perhaps you're an environmentalist and you care about climate change. Perhaps you care about the quality of our roads and acknowledge that road quality is heavily dependent on wear and tear, and wear and tear is heavily dependent on the weight of the vehicle. And so you acknowledge that cars do about 10,000 times as much damage as a single bike. And of course, 18-wheelers do another 10,000 times beyond that. So being able to ride your bike not only is good for the air quality, but also for our city's municipal budget when it comes to repairing roads. Brain development. This is a really cool statistic that I came across in the book Curbing Traffic. This is by Melissa Bruntlett, who recently moved to the Netherlands, and just fantastic information and resources in the book Curbing Traffic. But in particular, Dr. Appleyard in 2016 did a pretty detailed study about kids' intellect and impact of active mobility with regard to school performance. And two major factors came out of that. Number one, in terms of having children identify what their life looks like, draw their neighborhood, draw the school, draw the elements that impact their life. And kids who bike or walk for transportation are able to add a whole lot more detail and have a lot more of a story behind their pictures. Like, there's the tree where Jimmy and I did yada yada yada, or they know that it's two right turns and then a left to get to the ice cream place. They're able to identify so much more from a much earlier age compared to kids who get shuttled across town in a car repeatedly in a very passive mode of transportation for them. The other major finding in Dr. Appleyard's research was the fact, and as a bike commuter to work, I feel this as well, you and kids tend to feel energized after the bike ride to work or to school. And that energy level not only helps with potential ADHD symptoms, but also triggering your brain to be in a focus active mode. And that effect tends to last about 4 hours after the arrival at school. And so this has been correlated to improved test results with regard to complex thinking problems. So a pretty neat aspect that if you want your kids to do well in school, it's better to get them to walk or bike to school and really set them up for success at the beginning of the day. So, of course, one of the major reasons, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you might help your school enable the infrastructure to make you feel confident of your kid biking there. But hands down, the biggest reason to promote biking as a family or to incorporate in your own family is it's simply just fun. It is so much fun. The amount of connection that's built from seeing my daughter wave to neighbors or strangers for that matter, being able to wave to the streetcar, and the conductors are pretty good about waving back. Seeing all the decorations firsthand out of the view of the cargo bike, as opposed to trying to stretch over the door handle of the car to reach to try to see what people are decorating yards at. It's just so much more engaging being in a bike. And from a terminology perspective, as a family, we no longer really have errands or commutes. We just have adventures. And the journey to get groceries can turn into an adventure just by picking a slightly different route and seeing somebody new, or some new decorations, or how the trees change color. Biking is a really great way to be engaged in the sights and smells of the route, and not only connect with the people, but your neighborhoods, your environment. And it's been really clear with my daughter, as well as some other friends that we ride with. Their kids just absorb it all up too. It is so much fun. So I'm happy to interact with you all and let you test ride my bike and see for yourself, and convert a whole lot more people. After all, there is also research about safety in numbers, and I'm really a selfish person. The more of you who start riding, the more drivers are aware of bicyclists, and then the safer I am, the safer my daughter is. So really selfishly trying to get you all to bike with me, and I think you'll enjoy it. So a little bit, Jordan did mention a little bit of my background. I do have a partner, Jenny, who also works at Boeing. Isabella is age 3. Sagan, our pit bull boxer mix, is age 5. He was formerly a stray that then came down our street and has been spectacular as a dog, so much so that Isabella's first word was dog. And it's pretty easy to get her to stop crying if there aren't dogs around or if we go to the dog park. She just absolutely loves dogs all around. And I think the intimacy they've built in the cargo bike might have something to play there. I'm originally from Chicago. I lived in Colorado, and Jenny and I came to Oklahoma in 2014. And the whole aspect of being lifelong bike commuters has really helped us to absorb the environment that we're in and find true appreciation as we see Myriad Gardens or Scissortail Park getting built, or as we see new infrastructure projects or civic opportunities come in, or simply the aspect that on a bike it's really easy to put our foot down during the commute, lock up our bike to a rack, and enjoy the tents that have been set up at some event we didn't previously know about. So the impromptu aspect of the flexibility of bike commuting versus car commuting has really helped us find pride in our city. A little bit with regard to my eye for bicycling, in addition to just experience. So as a flight software engineer at Boeing, everything we do in our culture is focused on safety over everything else. And so whenever we make an engineering decision or heck, even a cost decision, these safety implications come into play with that. And that culture has sort of expanded into our street life. And so understanding what the research is behind different lane line paint widths, or what the research is between texture of the green paint on a bike lane versus no paint, the awareness that it brings to drivers, the implications from a safety standpoint are always first and foremost in my mind. It's hard to escape when I'm just biking around and notice the sight lines of where cars might see me best or drivers might see me best, and how I might position myself to enhance sight lines and my own safety. In regards to coaching a bike racing team or being a bike race director, the safety of the course comes first and foremost. So the safety culture at Boeing has really expanded into my safety perspective when riding myself, or when setting up my daughter in the cargo bike, or hosting group rides with others. And it's been a pretty helpful integrated culture for me. I am on the Better Street Safer City Advisory Committee, overseeing the sales tax for street enhancements, bike lanes, and sidewalks. And my interest in that level of detail has definitely made me very vocal on that committee. And although I can't necessarily see every bit of road, I'm happy for you all to reach out to me with your own comments for street enhancements projects, and I'll happily scrutinize the city plans about it for you. So Isabella was born in 2018. I did mention that Jenny and I have commuted by bike since really on a really heavy, frequent basis since about 2010. And when Isabella was born in 2018, all of a sudden we would have to put her in a car seat and in the car just to go a mile for groceries, or just to go any short distance. Most of the time, if the weather was good, we could put her in the stroller and we would walk or jog. But it was not great personally for my mental health to drive absolutely everywhere. And I didn't quite realize just how rough it was until 8 months later. My grandparents, my parents brought this down from a bike shop in Chicago. I had done some test rides. I knew this was something that I wanted. And when Isabella was about 8 months old, we got to take our first ride in it. And it was like a weight off my shoulders. The mental stress of driving, the mental stress of having to force her into a car seat, or the hecticness of paying attention to so many other drivers on major arterials as opposed to typical neighborhood streets. The frustration of the sight lines of the A pillar in the car blocking my visibility and creating blind spots versus being on a bike. Being able to interact with my daughter as she is sitting there observing the world around her, rather than her being in the back seat very passively. All of this played into a huge factor into my mental state after we got the cargo bike. So that was August of 2019 that we got the cargo bike. And 2 years later, 6,000 miles later, my only regret is not getting it sooner. We have integrated our neighbors into our lives. And so Isabella, you can see sitting there with our neighbor Maggie. They go to the same daycare. Our dog Sagan absolutely loves the grass there. There's one particular spot he's infatuated with every single time. And Maggie's mom, Lindsay, would ride with us, and it's always a delight. So much so that Maggie eventually started complaining about whenever they would drive as opposed to bike with us if our schedules didn't line up. So after about a year and a half or so, Lindsay now has a cargo bike of her own, and you'll see that in pictures later. And again, her and her husband, their only regret is not getting it sooner. So it's just an absolute joy. So things that we'll cover. Although I only have a single 3-year-old daughter, it's been, I understand that my view is limited of not riding with 6 or 7-year-olds right next to me, or watching them grow through the adolescent phase. So I'm hoping for additional input from all of you and your expertise on how you cope with your preteens. I will say we've done a couple of group rides with kids ranging from 1 year or 2 years old to 11 or 12. So there's a little bit of experience there, but maybe I'm not as intimately aware of the older kids' impacts as I might. So things that I'll talk about there relate from a limited aspect of experience, as well as just interactions I've had with parents about these issues in particular, as opposed to my direct experience. But this was Labor Day of 2018, so just a little bit before Isabella was born. We did an entire group neighborhood ride to the Plaza District in order to get ice cream from Roxy's. And a major tip, whenever getting started, make it fun. So the trip for ice cream is always a happy time for all, and pretty easy to keep kids in good spirits regardless of what else might be going on. So I'll talk about a couple of major things. Number one, with regard to progression into your commuter family lifestyle, equipment options to make you or help make you successful in that progression. Some thoughts and techniques about riding side by side as your kids grow out of the cargo bike element into riding on their own next to you. And then steps to integrate it further beyond just the bicycle, integrate the habits and the lifestyles beyond just riding. So first and foremost on progression, where I'm at today in terms of biking pretty much daily to work with a daycare stop on the way, where I'm at with regard to picking up gardening equipment and topsoil from Lowe's by bicycle. This all started from 10 or 12 years ago on my regular road bicycle with a small backpack on my work commute, which was only 2 miles, along a trail, along a creek, on a trail that actually got plowed before the roads in the winter. So not so much a dedicated commuter bike, in just a backpack, doing only $30 of grocery shopping every other day, into being able to do Costco level runs in a cargo bike. It took a whole lot of time and a lot of lessons along the way. So your development in terms of commuting experience, there will be mistakes. There will be times where you forget, say, the deodorant on your way to work, and maybe it's not too bad, but maybe you get by. Maybe you then learn to leave deodorant in your office drawer. It's a progression in terms of figuring out how to pack things, figuring out how to strap things down so that they don't rock and dissuade you. You'll figure out different habits in terms of weather for determining if it's a good day to ride based on the wind, what the likelihood of rain might be, and maybe in time you'll develop to have the gear set that the wind and the rain doesn't stop you for a bit. I'll admit personally, I did drive to work today, so it's even still, I'm not 100% biking. So I mentioned with the ice cream, start small and keep it fun. Getting Sagan into the bike trailer before we had the cargo bike. Our dog park is 2 miles away, which is a little bit long for him to run, then play, and then run home. But we didn't want to drive just 2 miles, and so we started with about 2 hot dogs to get him into the bike trailer, and then a lap around the neighborhood or 2, and all of a sudden his nose would perk up at the smells and the wind. And then another day we would actually use a hot dog to get him in and go to the dog park, and we slowly associated with good times. Similarly with my daughter, riding around the neighborhood on short trips, letting her see the sights and embrace it. Um, it helps that she started extremely young before she really had too much of a choice in the car seat strapped into the bike, and she's kind of just accepted it. The other aspects are, before taking her by bike to daycare, she already associated getting in the bike with fun, similar to Sagan associating the bike trailer or the cargo bike with the dog park. Since he'd already associated our bike rides with the dog park from the trailer, once we got the cargo bike, it was only a matter of him figuring out how to get in. He was more than willing. Give yourself a whole lot of grace. Understand that every trip isn't going to be ideal. You might plan this wonderful outing to Scissortail or to the zoo, but it turns out the sun's just beating down too hard and everybody's just complaining and too hot. Sometimes the ride to daycare starts off with a screaming morning battle, and compared to being in a car, being on the bike while my daughter is screaming, there's less echo, so it's a little bit easier on my ears. I can actually see her in front of me while she's screaming, so I know how serious to take it, or if I need to stop, and if it's something pain related versus just mood. The downside is we're not sound isolated, and everybody in the neighborhood knows that I am riding down with my daughter in a screaming fit. So there's a little bit of I don't know, parental. Every parent goes through it, right? So I shouldn't really call it parental shame, just experience. So there are those bad days, and it happens. Sometimes your plans change. Sometimes your day gets cut short. Sometimes you're out and have this great day planned, but then you realize you forgot the diaper changing pad, or you realize you forgot the change of clothes after they've spilled their food on themselves. And you go home early, and it happens. But more often than not, there's a learning experience to take away from it. So either if it's some gear that you forgot, or if it's temperature control that you didn't really think about, or if it was just too windy and you forgot their sunglasses and their hair was all over their eyes. You can learn from it, and depending on your child's age, you can integrate them in the learning as well. There are times where Isabella and I got caught in the rain, and she kind of complained. She wasn't in a super tantrum aspect from the rain, but at the end, she was not happy to be wet. And after we dried her off, we had fun with a towel wiping her down and shaking like dogs or something. And then we talked about it, and let's remember to bring the rain cover or bring the jacket next time, just in case. And so now she remembers, do we have the jacket? And so she'll help out a little bit with the packing. And then far more as you learn, there are just so many good experiences to fully embrace. And so, don't necessarily think that if you have a limited time to get somewhere on a schedule, if you take it a little bit slower, the moods might be a little bit better. You'll actually be able to smell the roses and point out things on interesting routes as opposed to the more direct, faster route. And that really opens up the opportunity for really cherishing those good moments, whether it's the smells, whether it's your child waving to the streetcar conductor or whoever else might be on the front porch. The fact that there might be the same person gardening every single day on your commute. You then start to build that relationship and find out their name and then share gardening tips. So there's a lot of good that can be embraced. If you can, be flexible and improvise. So oftentimes when I pick Isabella up from daycare, I would have her diaper changing stuff. Even if I had biked all the way into work, I'd take that with. I've had coworkers question why I have a milk bottle in the fridge during the day, and it's reasonable just to be prepared for when I pick her up. I may not know if she's in the mood to go to the park or go on the swings or just wants to go home or maybe meet mom out at the climbing gym. So I don't always have climbing shoes with me, but if that's what she wants, thankfully the climbing gym has rentals for kids her size. And I'll give her that level of control that once I get to daycare, we have an hour or so before dinner time. What would you like to do? And giving her that choice, I might give her a couple of options, and she'll choose one. And thankfully, most days my schedule is flexible enough to embrace that choice of entertainment that she has. And since she has that feeling of control over choosing what we're doing, she tends to be pretty in a pretty good mood in terms of getting into the bike, getting her helmet on, getting her seatbelt strapped, and now she's at the age where she actually loves the independence of being able to do that herself and show off her skills. Do budget in some extra time for your kids. If they bike on their own, they're certainly not necessarily going to be biking as fast as you, depending on their age. Maybe the 12 or 13-year-olds might have something up on you. So be aware that you might expect a 10-year-old to bike at 6 or 7 miles an hour, but also account for the fact that there are cool things to see, or that they might also need a stop on the way for the bathroom, or maybe they're not as skilled yet about taking their water bottle out of their bottle cage and they need to stop to drink. Budget in a little bit of extra time, or a lot, and make it a really improvised adventure. We do a fair amount of carry out around town, certainly a whole lot more during COVID to support local businesses, and that's kind of continued. We're not necessarily always out and about on a bike with a very specific meal in mind. Somebody might shout out an idea that I wasn't prepared for. I can fit an Empire pizza box in the cargo bike, but when I had Sagan with us, he kind of took up that spot. Tie-down straps work wonders. So being prepared for additional carry-out options is pretty important. On this particular day, I did not have my thermal grocery bag that I can wrap around it and keep it a little bit warmer. So we did have to reheat the pizza a little bit when we got home. But it was still delicious, and everything's delicious after a bike ride. So jumping into the gear, there are a whole lot of ranges of bikes on the market now. The major bike shows around the world are so heavily focused these days on personal and industrial cargo bikes. There's a huge range of options out there. We, of course, started with a standard bike trailer. These could easily be just $150. Most have abilities to adapt to most bikes on the rear hub or around the rear triangle. And it's a pretty easy option with a whole lot of carrying capacity. Here are siblings Maggie and Nate. Nate is, I think he's 6 in that picture. He might be 7 years old. They don't have necessarily a ton of room, but as long as it's a short trip, and they tend to get along really well, even if cramped. There was one particular day where we went out for ice cream, and 6-year-old Nate with 3-year-old Maggie and 2-year-old Izzy, all in the cargo bike. There was a little bit of knee and feet conflict, and so Nate's legs ended up going a little bit numb. We figured out a new seating position for his legs to be over the side of the cargo bike. So there's some improvisation there, and we didn't stay out as long as we might have otherwise. Probably about 4 weeks ago, Lindsay and her partner got the Rad Wagon, and this there are all sorts of options for adapting a child seat to the seat post of a regular bike, or on the top tube to the stem. The Rad bike has a little bit more structure built into the rear rack to support extra weight. This is also an electric assist, and so if you're just getting into bike commuting and you know your kids love it, or want them to integrate it more frequently, and you don't want to necessarily deal with joint pain or have to fight the wind too much with your own muscle, the electric assist makes a big difference. It's a game changer in terms of happiness and getting involved regardless of wind conditions. So yeah, they got the Rad Wagon. Going a little bit longer, this is Michelle up in Edmond. Michelle has a long-tail cargo bike with the capability to seat 2 kids. You'll notice that unlike a regular bike, the rear triangle is extended a lot further out, along with more structure around the rack to support the weight. A couple of extra considerations here. So the cargo basket up front is really handy. I think that might be Lindsay's next move for accessorizing the Rad bike. But with Michelle and with Lindsay's Rad bike, here there's a nice aspect where the kids behind you are inherently protected by the wind just from your own shoulder width. And that wind exposure to the kids is a pretty important point. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. A front-loading cargo bike style like I have is originally known as a Bakfiets, a Dutch term, um, essentially a box bike. So my daughter and sometimes Maggie and sometimes Sagan sit in front of me. Um, of course, without our rain cover, they're exposed to the wind a little bit more, certainly some more wind noise. I personally like it because I get to actually see them and interact with them. I know depending on how your kids' personalities are, they might not be as engaged in conversation if there's direct eye-to-eye contact. That can be kind of intimidating. And so I've heard that in some long-tail cargo bike configurations, the kids right behind you actually get to open up a whole lot more because they don't have that intimidating eye-to-eye contact. So there's a little bit of personality that works into what might be the best option for your family. In this particular example, I may mention that our commutes are adventures. We go through the Plaza District on our way to daycare downtown, and we always stop by the Plaza walls. This piece behind the cargo bike is by Virginia Sitzes, a close friend of ours who also, I'll show you some new pictures of, she painted the panels on our cargo bike. We call this work of hers apples and pears, and Isabella was really excited to show off the pear that she had as a snack at the same time. Plaza Fest next week is going to be redoing all the artwork, so pretty excited to see what comes up. Future goals is the school bus. This might range in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. So future goals, I've heard there's a bus driver shortage, and I might open up a GoFundMe if you want me to be a bus driver. I'll back up slightly. So these past bikes were also an order of expense. I equate the Reese and Muller load to I call it our minivan. It's one of the few it's one of the, I think, only full suspension cargo bike I was able to find on the market, so both front and rear shocks. The long tail here only has front shocks. For Oklahoma City roads and having Isabella start riding from such a young age where she didn't even necessarily have much neck control, that suspension made a big difference for me. And of course, of all the bikes that I test rode, this was, as I described it, stupid amounts of fun. Like it was, I could not get the smile off my face and knew it was the bike for me right away. And yeah, I don't regret the cost of it whatsoever. It's on the order of $7,000 to $10,000 depending on the accessories. I'll contrast that and say my wife and I did have two cars. We haven't driven one in a long time, and it's now technically in storage on our insurance. Trying to get rid of it, but just having it not active on our insurance saves us $600 a year in premiums. So if you're thinking about needing an extra car or just wanting to reduce car usage, there's definitely a cost savings to be had if you get the minivan of bikes. There are a whole bunch of others. That formatting didn't appear right. There are a whole bunch on the market in a range of costs. Long tails will probably be in the $1,500 to $4,000 range, maybe a little bit more for electric assist. Babo and this brand here, Falco, I think, are trikes that also have an opening door in the front to easily let you or your perhaps mobilely challenged or hip challenged grandparents to easily get in. There is one Babo by a family who recently moved here, and they've been on the full moon rides, and their kid and family just love it. Larry versus Harry has a fully rigid front-loading cargo bike, so no front suspension, no shocks. That might be in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. Urban Arrow has another cargo bike style, a front box bike with a much deeper setting than my Reese and Muller. So depending on how old your kids are and how much legroom they might need, that might be a little bit better. It doesn't have rear suspension. It's a little bit more upright like a cruiser than my Reese and Muller load. My commute to work is about 15 miles one way, and so I went for a more aerodynamic position rather than the upright cruiser style. But for shorter routes, the Urban Arrow upright style might be a great solution for bigger kids and a whole lot more carrying capacity. Similarly with the Reese and Muller Paxter, Surly has some long-tail cargo bikes. Rad Cycles has a range of options, from the short one that Lindsay has to a much longer long-tail bike. There's just a whole lot on the market, and that doesn't even begin to touch what you might think about for your company in terms of last mile logistics. And Amazon, hint, hint, shipping last mile boxes down our neighborhood streets. Yeah, DHL and a number of other major shipping companies overseas have been getting heavily into modified bikes and four-wheeled cargo bikes just for narrow streets and last mile connectivity. So other things when we get ready to ride, there are a number of things to notice in this particular picture. We've had pool noodles on the side of the panels of the cargo bike, and that helps support when she was a little bit younger and maybe not as much neck support in case there might be some bumps. On longer rides, depending on the time on the weekends, this is a good way to get her to fall asleep for nap time, and it's a lot better than just driving around and using emissions for nap time induction. So in addition to, I don't have it pictured here, but we have one of those sort of kid-sized airplane neck pillows, and so that plus little pool noodles is pretty comfortable for her. I did notice this was part of the progression. The pool noodles themselves in Oklahoma winds weren't necessarily the most stable, and so adding tie-down straps to make sure they don't blow away was a progression for me. Toys are pretty important just to have options there, as well as the puffball of her winter hat in case it gets cold. Often with the toys, it's really easy to get Isabella engaged at looking at her surroundings by also saying, hey, does Mickey see the streetcar over there? Or does Mickey see all the pumpkins on the lawn? And she gets really excited about basically speaking for her toys about that aspect and holding them out, and sometimes even holding them out so that they're flying and enjoying the breeze. You can see her jacket down there, so we do dress in layers. We've got a blanket. A beach towel is also pretty handy as a blanket, as well as pretty good for drying things. In this particular picture, she's got a coloring book for her own activities, but in most cases, she doesn't need a book or a coloring book. Mostly it's just observing the world around her. From a parenting standpoint, I do spend a fair amount of time of understanding the route ahead of time, knowing where the sight lines might be issues, knowing where the quiet roads are, where the interesting neighborhoods are, which neighborhoods have the best Christmas lights for her enjoyment. And then instead of having to focus so much on what the traffic is doing around me in the moment, I can actually converse with her and give out challenges of, can you find 3 yellow things as we go down the street? Or how many dogs do you see being walked by that neighbor over there? And just that interaction, that conversation certainly helps with mood control and keeping her attentive and happy. Other things to think about, so weather management. Certainly as you're biking, you're generating your own body heat. There's an aspect where you stay a lot warmer than they do when they're just sitting there and exposed to the wind. Some of the challenges I've had with Izzy from a very young age is not being able to talk and let me know if she's hot or cold. So I've done a whole lot of feeling her skin temperature during the ride or after the ride, just to see how I'm doing. There's one particular December where we had the winter cover on. We had her in the car seat and protected by the wind in so many ways. We had a winter jacket and we had a blanket. It was 25 degrees out and I definitely overdressed her. So it was a learning experience. I've taken advantage of a couple of neighbors who have 8 to 10-year-olds, and they love riding the bike or being passengers in the bike and getting to experience the neighborhood from that perspective. And they can let me know how they feel temperature-wise. And so they have expressed to me that at 70 degrees, going 15 miles an hour, it's a little bit chilly for them, even though biking I'm plenty hot. And so I've kept that in mind in terms of my child's temperature as they're just sitting there fairly passively but engaged in the environment. In the summer can be pretty challenging. Our winter cover has windows that roll up and then a sun shade to keep the sun from getting on Sagan or Izzy. We have a fan that clips onto our stroller. That's also really useful to clip onto the sidewall of the cargo bike and have it blowing on her for some extra wind. Frog togs are sort of like a cooling wet cloth that it's a chamois material and it retains moisture and really helps with convection when it's against your skin. So that's something that I ride with and something that Isabella may not love. She's not necessarily thrilled with the idea of wind, but especially if she's getting ready to nap, I'll put that on her to make sure she doesn't overheat in the summer sun. Um, Winter layering is pretty important. Um, there's certainly a saying of there's no bad weather, just bad clothing, and we've embraced the springtime rains and the smells that come with it. This is from a family of cargo bikers in Seattle. These kids are sporting Okie wear, Oakie, Okie wear, and they suggest that as although it's fun for getting out and being outdoors in rainy weather, these outfits from Okie wear might be a little bit too cumbersome from a time aspect in order to change out of and be ready for school and school clothes. So this I think is purely a fun adventure rain gear for them. But there are a whole lot of options on the market for all sorts of weather. Um, Mood management is heavily factored by snacks. Fruit snack. I often have fruit and vegetables, and Isabella does pretty well with them. But I always have more fruit snacks in my pack than I ever let on. It's essential. I can't emphasize that enough. Granola bars, fruit snacks, etc. And then if I happen to be out for too long or I didn't have as much for lunch as I thought, I can refuel a little bit too, and it's good for my mood. As your kids grow older, there are aspects that they can help with. So, for instance, Isabella does remember that we need her bag for daycare. She remembers that we might need a rain jacket. She really likes using the bike pump, even if she can't put enough pressure to actually do anything. So we do get her engaged in some of our maintenance activities. One of the quickest things to do before a ride to make sure you're going to have a good time is the ABCD quick check, and that's making sure your tires have the right level of air, that your brakes are functioning, that your chain and cogs spin pretty freely, that if your bike is light enough and you can drop it, or even with a cargo bike, just pick up one wheel and drop it. If anything falls or rattles, that's an indicator that you need to do something about that. There was a time where we had the sidewalls off of our cargo bike while Virginia was painting them, and that was a new aspect for us. Isabella and Sagan both enjoyed the extra visibility of the road going by fast beneath them, but then everything had to be actively strapped down as opposed to with the walls up. Quick releases just to make sure that your wheels are in the dropouts solidly, and I'm happy to go into more detail for anything that may not be extremely clear to you, and if Marty's YouTube video from last week is not completely answering all of your questions. Isabella is also pretty active with wiping down our bikes after the rain, or if we have to do some chain cleaning. She's usually involved. She's usually nearby and slowly learning the tools of the trade. And certainly our daycare has one of the ACOG quick tool, I'm blanking on the exact name, but the quick tool stations where there are wrenches and screwdrivers and Allen wrenches and pedal wrenches, and the kids seem to really enjoy seeing how that works. So that's at the age of 3. Certainly, as they get to be 6, you can have them be a little bit more independent and actually do some of the work themselves. Learning about bike maintenance, learning about gear ratios, perhaps as early as 9 or 10. So when riding with your kid next to you as opposed to in the bike, there are some general guidelines that make sense for all riders. So the major ones are understand the law and follow the law. With kids, the law isn't really the major point to stick to. Just emphasize the desire to be safe, and how to be safe is by being predictable, understanding your speeds, understanding where to ride. Kids are allowed to ride on the sidewalk. I've never heard of any adults getting complained about if they ride on the sidewalk next to their kids. It's technically only illegal for adults to ride in downtown areas or business districts. So in your neighborhood, sidewalks are perfectly fine. My daughter already knows hand signals. Whenever we make a turn, I ask her to put her arm out for the left turn, or her right turn arm out. So she's starting to know the hand signals, and it's helped her with left and right. Unless she's sitting backwards in the cargo bike, then it might be a little bit mixed up for her. So there are ways to adapt some of the be predictable elements or the think ahead. What do we need to plan for if we're going to go out to the park? Or what do we need to plan for if we're going to be out for an hour? Do we need a water bottle? And certainly your 6 to 10-year-old should have a pretty easy time of thinking about it and helping you get them prepared as well. Other aspects with regard to predictability, kids are a delight to watch while riding, but they don't always take predictable lines. I personally really enjoy weaving if there's nobody around, and rocking the cargo bike side to side. Isabella loves the sort of dance that we do. Predictability is predictability and hazard awareness, understanding if there's a pothole or if there are leaves on the ground that might be slippery or puddles to avoid, understanding that there might be others behind you that might not expect you to do that, is a concept that's pretty easily taught and understood by 8-year-olds and older. Beyond that, whenever we do group rides with kids, it's very helpful to have somebody understand the route and the pitfalls of the route or the visibility challenges of the route, where might be most interesting for the kids to be entertained by seeing decorations or seeing adults out gardening or people to wave to. It's helpful to have other adults behind to understand if cars are coming and what to do in that case. It's helpful to have an adult in front, and then with lead adult and follow adult and maybe one more in between. A whole bunch of kids can easily be managed pretty well just on that ride alone. I probably recommend, depending on the age and experience of your kids, if you're just getting into it, more than 3 kids per adult can be pretty challenging. But if it's a dedicated after-school cycling program that has a lot of education in the classroom behind it to start thinking about these things, middle schoolers are pretty good at a maybe a 9-to-1 kid to adult ratio. So gauge your level based on the way your kids retain information. And absolutely get some ice cream and have fun. It creates memorable connections, memorable experiences. I do want to touch on taking it beyond the bike. So we have the book Taking the Lead. We do bike stories. Taking the Lead is a fun book about a couple of dogs who enjoy riding around, but when their chain breaks, the big box bike store nearby suggests getting a new bike. And the rest of the bike is still good, and so the dogs decide to open their own local bike shop with a little bit of help from the local hardware store. It's pretty endearing, and we've got a number of books like this. Buddy Pegs has a number of books in their series. Pedal Love by is a pretty fantastic resource in terms of coloring pages for all sorts of transportation mobility paradigms. So embracing non-car related travel. They've got coloring pages for all sorts of things. Here's an Earth Day one. And little figurines for bikes. One particular friend colored and cut them out and attached them to cardboard and made some stands to make an entire scene. And of course, kids need to bring cargo too, like their toys, their toys, and maybe some snacks as well. And so you can create some pretty entertaining craft activities just thinking about active travel. And our daughter certainly enjoys coloring a lot, and it may not matter so much what the picture is, but we certainly integrate a fair amount of bike related things in our house. So enabling them to go further as they grow is where the advocacy piece really comes in. Certainly there's a lot in society that emphasizes certification at ways that aren't necessarily reflective of the risk. So an example here of how much scrutiny goes behind the design of a car seat and the certification of a car seat, and the fact that after giving birth, you need to show that you know how to use the car seat before they'll let you out, even if you're just walking home. Personal painful story. Anywho, it's unfortunate that only until recently, most traffic engineering seems to be just giving lip service at best, and even in some cases, leadership in some cities still just give lip service. So this is a great time for parents to get involved, call their schools, call your counselors, call your representatives, reach out to me and let them know that you want safer infrastructure that actually is research-based, that actually does make a difference and is more than just paint. There are opportunities for safe routes to school. That's a federal grant that I believe Jordan at ACOG helps administer. So schools can build traffic gardens and start instilling traffic awareness at a young age. Jordan, is it accurate that ACOG does support safe routes to school funding?
Yes, yeah, they kind of fall under another grant that we have, the Transportation Alternatives Program.
Okay, great. So yeah, if your school doesn't already talk about traffic safety and road safety, if it's not safe or comfortable for you to ride with your kid or your middle schooler to ride on their own to school, that would be one avenue to be vocal about and demand change. Last thing, just remember, it is a process. It is a progression to really integrate it into a daily aspect of your life. There are certainly aspects where we call out the neighborhood we're driving through when we're in the car. We still have Isabella stick her arm out for the direction that we're about to turn, and of course we absolutely love having her on the bike and experiencing all of that, and definitely try to embrace the moment and be as involved in the moment as you can. It's hard to be in a rush and not observe and enjoy those slower moments because they do grow up too fast. So yeah, reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter, my email, absolutely, and plenty of resources at Bike Oklahoma, so bikeok.org, and I'd love to hear your own tips and questions.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That was really great. A lot of good information. We do have some questions that came in, and everyone on the line, if you have any, please put those into the question box and I'll read those out. So our first question, what percentage of bike trips, or what percentage of your trips are by bike?
So it's been a lot this year, even though, well, it's been a lot the past 2 years. Last year during COVID, I was working from home most of the time, and so all of our commutes to daycare were by cargo bike throughout most of the weather. I only got a Clever Hood rain cape this March, and so this year we embraced riding through the rain. Isabella, of course, in the rain cover has not really had a problem whatsoever. And I've had other weather resistant wear before, so I can handle quite a lot. So yeah, last year work from home really helped out in just biking almost exclusively. Now I'm in the office 4 days a week and biking at least 3 days a week, so only once a week or so using the car. Camping trips, much longer trips, road trips, vacations, etc. We'll use the car. There have been a couple of times where, if I drove that particular day, I'll also make use of a grocery trip by car or a hardware store trip by car. We have the personal goal this year of keeping a car use to under 100 days, and I started off in January driving most days. July and August were really tough because of how hot it was. There's a little bit, so thankfully the cargo bike is electric assist, and so the wind isn't really an impact for me to not bike. So yeah, I'd say with regard to work trips, I'll use the car once a week. With regard to everything else, it's almost not an option. We found a really great shaded parking spot that perfectly fits the cargo bike at the zoo, and so that's been fantastic. Not an official bike parking spot, and there's no bike racks, but nobody's complained about us parking there. So yeah, most of our life is 5 to 10 miles or less, other than the work trip, and pretty much for all of those at this point, we're exclusively biking.
Yeah, that's great. So another question, at what age or weight do you think your daughter will outgrow the cargo bike?
So I've had adults in it. I think there's one point where certainly my wife and Izzy sitting together will fit just fine. My brother visited over Labor Day weekend, and we weren't going to drive just because he was visiting. and he didn't quite fit on any of my other bikes. So he and Isabella got pretty close to each other in the cargo bike, but there was room for both of them. He is 30 years old and about 180 pounds. My cargo bike cargo area is rated to, I think 220 pounds total, maybe 240. So that wasn't a problem whatsoever. The handling was slightly different. I did air up the tires a little bit more. But yeah, so outgrowing is an interesting question. I will say though, the 1.5 miles to Roxy's with the 7-year-old, the 3-year-old, and the 2-year-old, the 7-year-old's legs started to go a little bit numb, and Urban Arrow wouldn't necessarily have that problem because it's deeper and has more leg room. But if it was just a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, or a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old, I know that has worked for a number of people. And certainly there's aspects of how long of a ride we can do where they will stay happy. So if we're out for a half hour, or if we're out for an hour just riding around, that age, size, comfortability probably varies.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question, what do you say to parents who are concerned putting their smaller child into a cargo bike, mostly looking at safety concerns?
I generally probe, well, what safety concerns? Are you concerned about other drivers? There is a slight annoyance with my cargo bike where from behind, drivers don't know it's a cargo bike and that there's a dog and a daughter looking at them that most people smile at. So most of the time, drivers tend to like open their windows and roll them down and say, I would bike with my dog if I had a bike like that. So most of the time from other drivers, it's not a huge issue. Certainly, if I'm riding my road bike on my own commute, I might be more inclined to take class in or 23rd or go a lot faster. My ride to work on my cargo bike takes me down Eastern and 59th, which has 50-mile-an-hour speed limits and no bike infrastructure yet. Hopefully next year, by the end of next year, protected bike lanes. And I won't necessarily ride with Izzy on those roads. She has been in the cargo bike when I've hit 35. It was a tailwind and a downhill. But I'll generally choose quieter roads that are a lot more pleasant of an experience. And of course, there are still times where, despite being just as school is getting out and lots of kids walking around, I've had cars blow stop signs on me. So there's still a hypervigilant aspect. But honestly, it would be the same sort of hypervigilant aspect if I had my daughter in the car and we were driving. So the cargo bike doesn't entirely change that paradigm in my mind, but I'd happily talk about it some more. The other safety concern, certainly from an infant level, there's a concern about potential neck control and road vibration or bumps. That's part of why we went full suspension. Depending on your own road quality and how much you have to deal with where you are, I know it's pretty common for people in other parts of the country to start their kid in a cargo bike, in a car seat, sometimes on a spring-loaded adapter from 8 weeks old. There's not a whole lot of research one way or the other to show if there are detrimental impacts. Honestly, in my car, I can accelerate harder and I can slam my brakes harder. And the car seat has a whole lot more rigor around the analysis, but I think it can be just as jostling. And yeah, the engagement that Isabella gets from waving and smiling at everybody, and the amount of connection I feel from everybody waving and smiling at us, just totally overtakes a lot of that concern. Yeah, I certainly would be curious in years from now to see if there is research about road vibrations on bikes versus road vibrations in cars. But I haven't seen anything along those lines, and from a physics aspect, I can't conceive of major differences.
Yeah, thank you. Final question: how did you get the cargo bike to OKC from Chicago?
Oh gosh, that was quite an experience. So Riesenmuller is a German company. There are 14, or at least there were 14 distributors in the U.S. I test rode one in San Francisco. I test rode another in Washington, D.C. My parents are in Chicago, and there's a bike shop in Evanston, just north of Chicago. that is also a dealer. And this was actually a floor model at that shop. I had called around to Colorado shop and Austin shop, and at the time, nobody had any in stock, and it was going to be 5 months to ship another one from overseas. So the one in Evanston just worked out really fantastically, and my parents were super excited to see their granddaughter. So they were willing to rent a like a 15 passenger conversion van, only without the bench seats, like you might think of a commercial painter's van, and with an easy ramp or a little a 2x4, you can wheel the cargo bike in there pretty easily and bungee it up. I think there were some moving blankets around it too, and so they made the 13-hour drive with that. I had explored ideas of if somebody else happened to be making the drive, if they'd be willing. Shipping costs by professional shippers seemed to be about $1,200. So it was really beneficial that I had my parents I had a bike, a floor model bike in the style that I wanted in the city that my parents lived in, and they were very willing. I certainly worked with Steve Schlegel as well when he had Schlegel's Bike Shop downtown to become a dealer for Reese and Muller, but we needed 3 purchases to be the minimum order. And Steve was willing to get one, and I was willing to get one, but nobody else was signed on the scene. Now that I've given test rides to many other people, I think we might be able to hit that minimum order to have a local distributor. I think there might be some other cargo bike distributors around in Fayetteville. I know Yuba and Turn have been reaching out and expanding their Midwest options. So there are some increasing opportunities for bike shops here to start carrying them.
Yeah, that'd be great to see more of those here, especially talking about, you brought up commercial cargo bikes. We see that like Hall's Pizza has a cargo bike that they take deliveries on, and seeing more of those around, so it's exciting.
Yeah, I've been thinking of cutting my hours at Boeing and picking up a shift at Fertile Grounds and doing their compost exchange by bike.
Yeah, that's a cool program.
I think Surly makes a pretty long industrial bike trailer that I have on my list.
Nice. Yeah, that'd be cool. Love to see it. All right, well, that's all the questions we have, and we hit our hour. Thank you again, Tony. This was really great. And thank you everyone for joining us. Like I said, this is recorded and will be on YouTube later this week, and we'll have a post on our website next week that has all these webinars on it. We thank you for joining us and hope you check out the other ones. Thank you, Tony, and thank you everyone. Have a good night.